Hello, everybody. Welcome. If you can, turn on your camera and feel free to join the conversation at any stage, as usual.
I can see Alison. Hi. I can see lots of faces I know, which is very nice.
Yeah, we might have people turning up. Typically, that takes 5 or 10 minutes for people to finish arriving. But in the meantime, maybe we'll get started. Well, everyone, we're very privileged to have Julia Hilson with us tonight, and want to welcome her and maybe get started by asking you, Julia, what's your Montessori story? How did you find out about Montessori?
I think probably very similar to many people's story. I think I've heard this story from a few people, but I was obviously, I was a nanny in London and looking after a little girl who ended up, I was there when she was actually moved into the family home before she was born, looked after her. And then when she was 2, she went for some visits. And at 2.5, she started in a children's house in London. And of course, I knew nothing about Montessori at that point. There was probably a few months in, the assistant hadn't showed up. And the directress said to me, Julia, she knew I was only caring for this one little girl. She said, could you step in and help me for the morning? And so I said, well, I have to ask my boss. But yes, I of course I can help. So I helped for 2 mornings in a row, and I was sold. It was like walking into a different world. And I started speaking to her about how do you train and what is this? What is Montessori? And she gave me The Secret of Childhood to take home and read. And I read it avidly. It's still one of my favorite books that Montessori wrote. And really, that was just the beginning. So that's how I got into it. And strangely enough, at the time, this lady was AMI trained, but in fact, she gave me a list of all the places that trained. At that time, it was St. Nicholas, and it was called London Montessori Centre, which I think now goes under a different acronym. And so I kept ringing them, and the only one that picked up was on the day that I was phoning them was AMI, and they had an open day. So I went there and I met Hila Patel, and who was going to be very instrumental in my journey, and also Lynn Lawrence, who is now the executive director of AMI, and she was a trainer in training. So she was working alongside Hila and was in the process of becoming a trainer. So yes, that's really, that was how I got into it.
And what's been your journey since then? What's your role now in the Montessori world?
Okay, so I am a 0 to 3 AMI trainer, and I train around the world. So I would say that's my main role. It's what I spend most of my time doing, is running courses at 0 to 3 level. But then another big role that I am very careful to hold on to, and I'm very keen to be actively involved in, and I do this weekly, is I'm very involved with the work up in the Torres Strait Islands. And so I have weekly get-togethers with the ladies who are running programs up there. I support them from a distance. And the big task that I'm working on now is every week they send me observations, and I'm sort of working with them weekly on progressing them to start seeing more, to understanding more about development, and then how to support children, individual children, as well as the whole group of children that they have with them. So they're the 2 roles I have. And apart from that, I do mentoring and really just helping out. I have quite a few parents. I've got 3 families at the moment on the Gold Coast that I'm working with very, very closely with newborns and supporting them. And I usually keep in touch with them as their children grow and develop. I'm also on the scientific pedagogical group, which is a committee with AMI. So, and we really look at development of the courses, content on the courses, any new material that people suggest, any new ways of training that people suggest. So I've been on the SPG group for 4 years, and I've just accepted to stay there for another 4 years. So
So how did you get from where you started, where you were first talking about in London, to where you are now? What led you to pursue the pathway that led you to be a trainer and to be on the SPG and your work in the Torres Strait?
Wow. I mean, I'd have to say, look, my interest when I first started is I just wanted to learn more about children and development. So when I first started, I certainly was not someone who ever didn't have any aspirations to be a trainer, that's for sure. That's not something I was thinking about. So I worked in the course, like in the training course, they have a school downstairs in London. So my first job was working there. And you're sort of invited to do that after you train. And I worked there, and I actually worked as an assistant on their training course. Then I decided I really wanted to go out and start my own. So I started my own little school out in Windsor, outside of London. And I started it with a fellow, colleague of mine who I trained with. I ended up, just because of, getting married, and we decided to move back to Australia, that I left that, and she still runs it to this day. And I came to live in Australia, and from there I've worked in many different schools. But very, very soon, when we settled on the Gold Coast, there was actually one Montessori, and I went to visit that lady and went to see her little class, but there wasn't really any Montessori, certainly within the Gold Coast, apart from this one woman who was running one. Mm-hmm. And I made contact with people like, I'm sure many of you know, like Glenda Sortel, Eva Nislev, there is Carmen. All these names are coming to me, but we all got together and we used to meet up and share our ideas. But I started a childcare centre out in Benogan, out the back of the Gold Coast. I've worked in a few Montessori centres that sort of approached me and asked for me to help them open up childcare centres, like much larger centres, and make traditional childcare centres Montessori. So I did that. Meanwhile, in between that, I also did my 6 to 12 training in Bergamo, which I really enjoyed, and then worked and ran a 6 to 9 for 3 years. And that was sort of linked to my first children's house that I had out in Benogan. And I ended up, I'm sure many of you know the history on the Gold Coast is we had a school here for many years that I was also part of. And so I worked in that school, either in 6 to 9 or 3 to 6. And then I decided to go and get 0 to 3 trained, although I have to be really honest, anyone who knew, probably Fern, you remember this, we
studied together.
Yes, we studied together on that first course that came to Australia, the 0 to 3 course. And I didn't actually personally want to do it. I was actually a friend of the trainers, and I wanted to help it come to Australia. So my husband and I, and my husband Barry is very, very good at all the administration side. He supported it happening. So he did all of that. I just helped find the premises and get the students. And basically I said, I'm not interested in doing it. I'm just going to be there to support you and help it happen. I don't want to do 0 to 3. And she refused to come unless I did it. So I said, oh, okay. So I did it. And it sort of makes me sometimes sit back and think, if I hadn't done it, what would I have done next? But I ended up doing it and loving it. Absolutely. I really enjoyed that course. but I still, my real, I suppose my experience at that point had been 3 to 6. So in total, I've had 17 years running 3 to 6 programs, and I mean, I absolutely love all of it, but 3 to 6 was something very special to me. I did, however, straight after getting trained 0 to 3, I decided that I should really implement it. So I ran 2 little programs, one attached to my home, which I did for 3 years, and another one then attached to the Montessori school on the Gold Coast. But very soon after that, I moved and decided to take a job as assistant principal to Stephen Arnold at Brisbane Montessori School. And there I sort of looked and took care of all the programs under age 6. And that I was only there a year, though, because I was finishing my master's in education. And at that point, I got the opportunity to do something I had always wanted to do, and that was to work in an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community. And so I took the chance. I came out of that sort of administration role and went back into the classroom as a 3 to 6 directress. And I'd have to say it's certainly been the highlight of my career. Going into a place like that, into a pilot project where you're having to use all the knowledge you have over many, many years and actually really put it into practice in a community that had no Montessori. It really helped me crystallize my understanding. For me, I started to, even though I did know it, but quite often when you're in communities, I don't know how many who are listening have had an opportunity to work in a community where there is no Montessori, and where people have not been given choices. They have no choice. It's this education. This is the only school you get to go to. It's quite a different experience. And I think the principles of Montessori for me were very clear by the time I'd finished that experience. And I feel often in Montessori, we lose our way because we don't understand those principles. And so for me, it was a gift. It was very challenging. It was hard. It was grueling. But it was so beautiful. It was one of those experiences that I feel very blessed to have had. So
Julie, can you say a bit more about how it challenged you? How did working in Torres Strait challenge what you had learned in training and what you'd practiced previously? What made it grueling, and how did that help you really, solidify your understanding of the principles?
Well, I think all of us can agree that anyone who's run a children's house knows that if you have children who come in at 4, it's going to be challenging. Anyone who's had a 4-year-old come into the classroom knows that. But, on the day that I started, I was told I would have 16 children. That turned out to be 28 children. And partly it was the administration part of it that I was told one thing and something else happened. I ended up with a lot of 4-year-old boys. I had 6 girls in that cohort, and I had all these boys, for many of them who were turning 4 or were 4. And yeah, it's really challenging. And I actually doubted, really doubted at times. So I think for me, it was grueling because I was really put to the test. And the thing that saved me were Montessori's books, because I would read them every night. And for some reason, always the right chapter would be there. It was literally, it made me realize how much, we often forget to go back to her books, but she left such gems. I never forget. One of the things I do remember is I've read her books long before I went to the Torres Strait, but often you come across something that doesn't jump out at you. But the one thing that really helped me is that your aim is not to use competition in Montessori. But just this quote that, or one part of the book I was reading, where she talks about the need for it, because we always intervene when chaos is about to happen, and we know that. But what does that mean? What does it look like? How do we do it? And I remember her talking about in a group sitting and sort of saying, oh, I'm going to use your name, Lauren, because I can see you on the screen. So Lauren's sitting so quietly. She's not moving her feet, you know, and then all of a sudden all the children are going, well, I can do that too. So it's this kind of competition that you would set up, but it's not ideal. But I think, like, Montessori was really clear that we use those tools until the children are ready. The other thing I've really learned was the art of, she speaks about freedom, but also many people, they hold on to these principles, but they don't understand them. The principle is that we only give a child the freedom they can cope with. We're not going to give them freedom that they're not able yet to cope with, that they're not ready for. So, you know, otherwise she's very clear, it's abandonment. So these children they could not handle too much freedom. They were, you know, really out of control. So I had to implement things I had never done before, you know, not in this way, because I would have one or two, not a whole class. So yes, it challenged me to my core, but I never forget. And because my husband was a very big part of this, because really he became my assistant, because he was the only one who knew something about Montessori and could be there for me as I needed. So I would say to Barry, I need you in the class. You're going to have to be here with me, because, you know, we're not going to be able to do it without you. So I tried some strategies I've never had to try in any other classroom, which are things like, I'm not suggesting anyone does it, because hopefully you only have one or two, but I did things like, I had a different colored mat that wasn't their work mat. It was slightly bigger. And in the early weeks, I did this for the first 6 weeks, I was very careful. I'd set up the environment, then I removed a lot of the materials, because I couldn't get to all those children to give presentations really. And that's what they needed to connect with that material. So what I would do is I had a selection of them. And I remember I had a friend, Lucy Reynolds, come up and help me too. And she said she couldn't believe it, because she's never seen anyone give 30 presentations in a morning. But that's sort of what I did, because I would have the children sit on this mat. Barry would be there. And of course, because he's male, he's got a very deep voice. He would, this sounds awful, he would just say very clearly, sit down. And they would sit and they would listen. And then my job was to keep coming back and taking them and getting them engaged with the material and doing one presentation, fading, observing, getting the next child going. Yes, it was very, very challenging. But by September, what we saw was something quite miraculous. So we started at the end of January, and by that fourth term, there were things starting to happen, or late in that third term, but definitely by the last term, it was just beautiful to see. And I can see now and sort of understand what Montessori was speaking about, because the true nature of the child is revealed when they are at work and when they're engaged in what they're doing, and it's through their own choice. But at the beginning, I couldn't give them that choice. It wasn't something they were able to handle. So all of those principles became really clear to me, but I'd never had to, I understood them, but I didn't have this sort of experience that could help me sort of really crystallize it and really truly understand it. And the other thing that I was dealing with there, which was very interesting and something I'd never experienced before, was that no one in the community knew about it. There was no one who understood it. So the parents weren't sure about me. And I was someone from down south who was working with their children. And so a lot of the elders in the community would stand, and I couldn't get them to sit in the classroom. So they would be standing around while I'm doing this. They would also, within the first month, I got them to stand outside on the veranda and look in, but they wouldn't leave. They would not leave their children there for a long time. And as they started, I also decided that I tried to do some parent talks. They didn't work. No one turned up. They have their attitude towards education, was quite negative. They did not really want this. They weren't sure about it, but they were sold within the first term. They wanted more classes and they wanted more children in that class. So we ended up with a much larger class. We had like 40 children. It was like a double class 2 years later, because there was real buy-in from the locals who said, this is what we want. This, they were absolutely committed to it, because they said it was respectful of their community. It was respectful of their culture. And then I ended up having a lot of elders coming in and helping, and it became really a community school. So for me, it was extraordinary to watch that, but I had to really stay very focused on the children. And I think the parents really respected that. They knew that whenever I set a very clear limit, I always did it with love. I was kind, I was firm, I was consistent. And that's why it was grueling, because there wasn't just once a day. It was sort of every minute nearly in the beginning, but we saw huge changes over that first, the first 3 terms. So I think that's where the grueling part of it was.
Julia, it sounds like you really discovered the true spirit of Montessori, in the sense that she was a scientist, experimenting to find what works. Do you think that spirit of experimenting, in the sense that Montessori did, is discouraged now in many training situations?
Well, I can only look. I prefer to just speak for myself, and that is that I know, and I've got a couple of students actually on this listening to me now, but I think I encourage experimentation very much. I don't believe Montessori would want us to do anything but that. Now, that doesn't mean experimenting. I don't believe that it's necessary to bring anything else in. So that means experimenting with a bit of this philosophy and a bit of that. I don't think we need it. I think this is a very solid method of education. And if we're guided by her principles, it is actually very simple. So I believe I'm very experimental in the sense that, because every child is going to respond differently, I'm quite clear what I need to do. But I feel that within groups, when you've got a cohort of children, there's some things that need to happen, which next year you might not need to do. So we can't be the same. We sort of each day we have to read what's happening within this class. And they are little communities, even children's like toddlers. People don't believe that they're able to be together in a little social group, but they do actually become a little social group. And we know in Children's House, they definitely, that socialization is important. So we have to be able to read not only individual children, but also, and meet each individual's child's needs, but that's within a group, because we also have to be respectful that, when we make decisions for each child and guide them in, what they need to perhaps be. This is particularly with Children's House, what they are ready for, what they need to be doing, what maybe you've noticed that they're really interested in something and the right piece of material. We're taking them there, but we're taking them there with an understanding that it's the right thing for the group as well. So yes, I definitely agree with, and I hope Montessori educators think like that.
Well, there is a dichotomy between how some people see, I guess, the role of the teacher being to implement the pedagogy as it was written by Maria, because it's true forever, going backwards and forwards, and for every culture everywhere it should be implemented the same, because the needs of the child are universal. And then there's another view that the role of the teacher is like you're describing, to kind of adapt and experiment with the method to find what works for particular children?
I think that I'm always interested when people say that Montessori said that we need to do this or do that. And I always question people and say, because I know her writing really well now. As a trainer, I've studied them all again over and over. And so I'm always intrigued when someone quotes and says that this is what we're meant to do in Montessori. And I say, so what principle are you following here? Because I only want to talk about principles because, you know, she didn't really write exactly, particularly with 0 to 3. She, you know, she wrote about the psychic embryo, the spiritual embryo, which we know the child is in this first 3 years of life. She was really clear about this period of self-construction. She also spoke about those psychic organs that they're developing at this time, and then ongoing the consolidation that happens sort of in 3 to 6. But she didn't tell us how to do it. She gave us some words. She said with humility, with love, the kind of love that is intelligent love. You know, she gave us some beautiful writing that she gave us on how we approach this. She gave us the principles that we can follow, but we have to work out the rest in 0 to 3. In 3 to 6, there are some of those earlier books where she wrote manuals, where she gave some ideas of, and it's often confusing to people, where she talks about the presentations, but it's not in enough detail that we could say, because in other books she says it another way. So then, you know, we have to be very careful about that. So we have to always look at the principles. And, you know, for me, I'm very clear now, particularly as a trainer, that I don't, you know, when I'm training, I say to students, okay, so this is how I handle this situation. This is not what Montessori said. This is using this principle that she's given me. This is how this is the strategy I'm using, but we have to be clear about that. So it means that we have to help students who want to learn more about Montessori to start going back to her books, because the more we read them, the more we understand it. And the more we're working with children while we're reading it, you know, I often say to students, just read a couple of chapters each night, you know, pick up a book and start, because there'll be something there that will help you with the work. So I feel there's a lot of confusion.
Did you find yourself needing to adapt what you'd read, what you'd learned in training to help Montessori work better for the children you were serving in Torres Strait?
Actually, can you ask that again, Mark? Sorry.
Yeah. Did you find yourself needing to adapt or adjust or alter things that you'd read in Montessori's books or that you'd learned in training in order for it to work for that situation, that culture?
Actually, I was very blessed, because while I was up there, I was in close contact with Hila Patel, my 3 to 6 trainer. And she's been guiding me through, you know, really right through me becoming a trainer as well. But during my work there. So for me, she was, you know, I feel my 3 to 6 training really set me up to be quite open to always coming back to this, the principles, because that's what I really got from my first training. So I also think the way I was trained, my first training, had a huge impact on me, because we weren't given all the presentations. We were never given all the presentations. So we were introduced to, you know, I remember having one very detailed practical life presentation, and then we were given another very simple one, and then we were set free in this classroom and told, go and work it out. So because, you know, Montessori didn't say, you know, hold a jug like this, pour it this way, go and get this, but it must be logical. It must make sense. It must, and everywhere we go, it's going to be set up differently. You must know your presentation, but there's very clear guidelines. She spoke about analysis of movement. So those things we look at with students, and we make sure, so for me, that question, I feel that, for me, I'm always going back to those principles. So she gave us a lot of freedom to work this out ourselves. She gave us what we need to be able to use our intelligence and our observation skills of the children with us to allow us to be able to be there to guide, to aid their development. And so, I think it's much more freeing if we think about it as principles rather than, this sort of doctrine of, because otherwise that's where you meet people who say, oh, we only carry the number rods this way. And then there's other groups who say, no, you must, if you're in Montessori, you do it this way. And, there's all of these rules that are just, and people hold on to those, and that is not what is important. I mean, it's important we're consistent within the classroom, and that's up to the directress to make sure that happens. But I don't believe that is what Montessori wants us to be doing now. She wants us to be very clear about the principles, to understand, what children need, and to be able to meet those needs.
I think that's the key, isn't it? The observation, just being able to observe keenly and then apply the principles to what you observe.
Yes, definitely.
Is there a book, like if you had to recommend one book to get started with, what would you say that would be?
Well, look, I have lots of parents asking me this, and I'd say, look, years ago, I mean, as I said, The Secret of Childhood, I absolutely love. It was one of her earlier books. I mean, The Absorbent Mind is it's a culmination of a lot of work in India when she had time to really put her thoughts together. And it's one of her later books, is obviously a beautiful book with everything in it. But for parents, I really like the 1946 London lectures. And again, I think they're bite-sized. They also have some, real gems in there. So I would recommend that book. But there's so many I like for different topics. So I feel that the 1946 lectures, if someone who was new to Montessori, I think it's a really nice introduction.
Okay.
And The Secret of Childhood, it's still my absolute favorite. And I do like the, I'm thinking of the book where it goes into the history that was written by E.M. Standing. I'm sure someone else can help me. And that's up here, Maria Montessori, Her Life and Work. I mean, I think that's a lovely one to show the history of her life and all of her thoughts as well. And I know AMI, I certainly know the Montessori family, condoned that book and were very, very happy that book came out. So it's one that you can trust as far as historical information.
As you know, there's a lot of turnover of staff at the moment. It's really difficult for many schools and centres to hang on to teachers. What do you have advice for an inexperienced young new teacher entering Montessori at this time?
Gosh, I know that I've had conversations with I think I can see Rebecca and Lauren about this on our course in Brisbane, because I know a lot of the people on the course were telling me that, there's a big high turnover. Often they're young people who are actually not really interested in early childhood development. And but they're in there because they need a job, which I think is terribly sad, because if you have someone who enters into a childcare centre and is with these young children at a very important time in their life, then I find that one of the saddest things to hear, that You've got people who are fronting up to work with children each day who don't even have the heart for the work. So I think this is a very huge dilemma. I've heard it from people all around the world, actually, that staff is a big problem. And I don't know the answer to it, except that I feel that I've run centers, and I know what I did, but I'm quite clear of my expectations. Anyone who's worked for me will can vouch for that. I've got very high expectations, but I'm also very open to them communicating with me when they need more time off, or they're overwhelmed, or they need, so I think there's a balance where we have to take care of our staff and show kindness to them, but also be very clear about our expectations of what is expected in this job. And, when people don't want to do it, I think it's really good to just let them go. And I know it's hard to find staff, but also I don't know whether it's a matter of being brave and just letting people go and saying, if this isn't for you, then you need to go find something that is purposeful for you in your life. And we need to find someone who opened the door to someone who actually wants to be here. I've had a lot of success working with young people who actually want to do the work. So someone who's open, who perhaps has never done any training. And I've done this in the Torres Strait. They're not Montessori trained, but they are eager to learn. And when someone is eager to learn, there's many things we can work with them, like supporting them, helping them, guiding them with what they're reading, giving them time to ask us questions. Like, it's not impossible. And there's some writing at the moment that's been at AMI that's being translated of Montessori's time working with the hill tribes in India when she lived there. And there are some gems in that have been read to me by Lynn to do with, that she said they have, they're intuitive. And the most important thing is that they're interested in the young of their community. So they're open to learning. They want to know. And so, she was very clear that you want the person who has the longing to do this work, because then they're going to be the ones who are there to meet this child's needs. They're going to be trying to find a way to meet this child's needs. But when we have someone who's doing it for a job, then they're shut off. Their mind is somewhere else. They're thinking of what they're doing tonight and, waiting to get on their phone. Often, I hear people having real problems and issues with mobile phones, that they're forever looking at them. So you have all of these issues, but someone who's present and actually wants to be there and is interested and notices things and is observant and sees and is delighted when a child reaches a milestone, they're the ones that we want. See, somehow in your interview process, you've got to find that out, I feel.
So you're talking about spiritual preparation of the teacher, it becoming a calling. How do we, in training, I mean, you can't really mandate that somebody goes through that spiritual transformation. How do you
No, and I've done enough training
guide somebody
to know
along
that
that path?
some people have this transformation and some people don't. I remember when I first did my first couple of courses, I was really a little disheartened. And I remember I spoke to Hilla and I said, some people are getting their diplomas and they don't get it. How does this happen? And I remember her saying that you have to be okay with that. You have to be all right, because you don't know when they might come back to this later on down the track. You don't know how it's impacted them. You can't possibly know that. But not everyone changes through training. But you hope that there's enough change. And I believe there is. I really do. I feel I've seen enough courses now that I see some, really beautiful things happen on training that happens just, within that person. It's not that I've made it happen. It's the knowledge that they're receiving. And then I really think in 0 to 3, it is also the observations. I think it's the same in probably children's house, but not being a trainer at that level. But I know my own journey is 3 to 6. It was when it's not just, Montessori writes about this. It's not the intellectual knowledge. It's the intellectual knowledge and then actually going out to observe and teach, be with children, because it's then you go, aha, this really works.
Yeah.
This is it. This is when you understand it. And so that's really why I started to really understand, as I said, those principles at a very different level, because I was tested, wasn't I? And I had to, the one thing that I was told, I remember Hilla, when she heard me do a big rant one night on the phone, she said, Julia, like, never lose faith in the child. Never. You mustn't. And I had to be told that, and I was someone who was very experienced, but there were days I was just, is this ever going to work? Is this, am I doing everything I can? What else can I do? I was grabbing at straws. I really was. There were many tough days, but I had to, she was great because it was actually Hilla Patel, and I don't know how many of you know Ginny Sackett, but I also had some lovely conversations with Ginny Sackett in the States, and also my own trainer at 0 to 3, who was on like speed dial, basically, Sylvia Carboni Singh, who trained Fern and I. And it was just, really those people helped me, they guided me. And I needed that. I needed, they allowed me the freedom to speak, but they also pulled me in. They gave me some chapters. You go home and read this. Again.
What you're saying is that, often for many of us, spiritual transformation comes out of the experience of teaching real children in a classroom, not necessarily immediately from the training, but it comes from the practice. And
observation, I think, because I've met people, older people who have done courses, and sometimes they just get to do the observation and they're there as sort of support, and they also see it because you can see it. I mean, if you know how to observe, you also see it happen before your eyes. So I think both ways you can do, but certainly, you're growing as a person when you're having to handle these things daily. You're being challenged personally, because unfortunately we all come with our own triggers, don't we? And we're all, there's children that behavior, it's not children, but it's certain behaviors that we see in children that trigger us. And that's where we get to grow and learn. Those children become the ones that we actually, become our teachers, and we learn the most from, because, we have a very big response to it. We're thinking,
and you don't necessarily know that you have those triggers until they're triggered.
Yes, exactly. And then you think, where did that come from? Why am I having a problem with this? But it is those children. I mean, I think all of us, there's a few people here I know who have been working for many years with children. And, those children, you remember them, don't you? You just think, I remember this one. And then you see them when they come in at 2.5 or 3 in your children's house, and you see them when they leave you at 5.5, 6, and you're thinking, wow, that's a transformation. It's, it's so beautiful to see that. Of course, you only have to see that a few times that you begin to understand the importance of us remaining very present and remaining calm when you see this little 2.5-year-old that comes into your children's house and is, all over the place, that this is normal. This is okay. And also, the effect of, our body language, our facial expressions are going to affect children. So, when we're calmer, when we have an understanding of these principles, then we enter that space with children who have behavioral problems, like they're really acting out. It's very easy to remain calm. It really is. Like, once you know intellectually and you know what you need to do and you've done it many times, it becomes second nature. It's very easy. Like, I'm a grandmother now, and we have a lovely little 2.5-year-old who's really testing, all of us really. And it's funny when she's with me, like she just knows how it is. And my daughter says, does she do this for you? Does she do? And I say, no. And she said, well, like it's so different. But you see, I'm an old hand at this. It's easy for me. I've had enough experience that it's very clear. Like, I just give her very clear choices. I just say to her very clearly, I can see you really want to do this. And I said, but you've left this out over here. So, would you like me to carry this part of the activity, or would you like to carry, which part would you like to carry? And then yesterday I said to her, because she really didn't want to do it, I said, would you like to go over to the mat and put your work away by yourself, or would you like Granny to carry you over there? And she looked at me and she said, I walk like this. And she walked straight over, put it away. It's just about being very clear and very firm, because that's what they need.
It's great to hear you say that, because I feel like it is really a deepening process. And
it takes years.
When I'd been teaching 5 or 6 years, I felt like, wow, I'm just starting to get it. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I'm really just now. I feel sorry for my first class, because I'm only just starting to get it. And then I'd been teaching 10 years and I felt like, wow, I really didn't get it back then at 5 years. And now I really get it. And then, it kept deepening. And so the longer
I think we all feel like that. I think all of us. I sometimes look back to my first class and think, oh dear. I look at the photos and I say, I'm so sorry. I was as prepared as I could be.
Yeah.
But now I do it with conviction. So I'm just very clear and not emotional. And, I've had time to work on myself. So it is easier.
Julia, what do you think, what do you see as the biggest challenges for Montessori in Australia?
I think because of just the history of the things that have happened in the past, I feel it's bound to, like, if you look back over history of any organization, this is the same story for all of them, that when there's been any, I suppose, well, I'd have to say it's been quite fractured. There's been lots of different groups. And so when you're building community, it's about coming together, and then having people come together is always hard, isn't it? Because life is busy for everyone. I know if you look at the group of trainers in Australia, for instance, it's really busy. There's not enough trainers around the world to do the work that needs to happen. And so everyone's under pressure. So even just trying to get that little group together to then be part of another bigger group, there's going to be, challenges. I think I feel it's going to get there, and hopefully I believe it will get there. I hope in my lifetime I get to see it. But I think it's about people just going in with the right, stepping forward with the right heart, and be willing to be part of something. And I think it just takes time to grow. Some people need time to heal as well from things that have happened. When people have had bad experiences, it's a personal journey. So we can't ignore that. You can't just say, oh, well, that was in the past, and get over it. It takes people time. And I think it's just about time. And I think if you're patient and you're dedicated and you just surge forward, and those who are ready march forward, the others will come along. And I think it's about remaining positive and true to Montessori's vision, because I'm very clear about her vision, and I'm not interested in engaging in anything that sort of sways away from it, because I know it works, and I'm passionate about it. I couldn't do my training if I wasn't. So I think it just takes time.
Why aren't there enough AMI trainers in the world?
Because that's another grueling process. I think it's pretty hard to find people who are willing to commit to that sort of training. it's extensive. You know, it's a big commitment. And
does it need to be that grueling?
I think, look, I think that the process I went on, which is I did 2 courses with a mentor trainer. So the first one, it's like listening again and supporting and taking it all in, but not as a student, but as a trainer, or a potential trainer, because not everyone gets through the whole process, because some people decide this is not really for me. And it's for you to look at, is this really what I want to do? I think that was important. I also was mentored by a different person than I was trained, which means I was able to see a different way of training, which I think is really important. And they do want you to see someone different. And then the second course, you start to lecture, and it's pretty full on. I think lecturing for the first time, certainly for me, it was. Some people love lecturing. I'm not a natural lecturer, but I am passionate about the topic. So obviously I enjoy the process when I'm with a group of students. But I have to say that second course was instrumental. I went to London and did my second course with Judy Orion, and I did probably a third of the lecturing. I don't know that I could have handled the whole lot. I really couldn't. And I also got to learn about the exam process and lead students through that, but with someone guiding me. And then I was into training, doing the training myself. And I think that's pretty quick. And I feel it's a commitment of time, you know, when a lot of people need that income and you're not really getting an income. That doesn't happen in all places, but certainly in the time that like Sarah Brady and myself trained, we you know, you don't get an income, so you have to be willing to throw yourself into it. I don't know that they could do it any other way, Mark, because it takes time, because you have to also write all of your papers. You have to get those approved by AMI, and they're all the theory. And it should actually go to them, because they have a board of, it's not just a 0 to 3 trainer that will read my papers when it comes to theory. It's very experienced trainers at all levels that really look at that and read it and make sure that it, you know, the right quotes are used, that I'm very clear about what I'm trying to get across to students. So I feel that was a good process. I actually enjoyed that part of the process.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, the rigor is definitely pays off, of course, and it's a good thing. However, you know, it is true that Montessori remains a very boutique, niche method of education in the world after 115 or whatever it is years. If we're going to scale up Montessori and make it available for more people, do you think we need to find a way to make Montessori training kinder and a bit easier? Is there a way to make it easier and preserve the quality, or does it need to be rigorous and tough to maintain the quality? Do those two things necessarily go together?
Well, I think actually that's quite a challenging question, actually, because I sort of feel the rigor needed to be there, to be honest. You don't want someone, you don't want someone standing up in front of students who doesn't understand Montessori, and has really read her books. There's many people who do Montessori that have not actually read, they've dipped in and out of her books.
Yeah.
And they actually get all their information off the internet. And I'm sorry, if you want to be a trainer, I even know people who've done that and started classes and are quite successful. I'm not saying it's not possible to do it that way, but to be a trainer is something else. I mean, I do think you need to really know her work. Having said that, I'm all for people. I would like to see more people come forward who would like to become trainers. I'm very happy to take on mentoring. I'm already mentoring 4 people at the moment, and one of them's almost finished. She's in India. She's an extraordinary young woman, and I'm so happy that I've been part of her journey. So, I mean, it's just about, you know, encouraging people also to go on that journey. You know, I feel I've got a woman, Rebecca Bridge. Some of you might know her. She runs the toddler community at Brisbane Montessori School, but she's done the first part of her journey. I'm very, you know, I've got someone who from New Zealand, so she will be finishing at some point. So again, there's those 2. I know we have another lady, Emma, who's working with Sarah Brady, and she's sort of got to do her final. So, I mean, we've got a few people out there that are almost finished. We'll be looking for more next. So, I mean, I'm all for people coming forward to start this process. You sort of need, as a trainer, you do need time to write those papers, to think about how you want to train. And also everyone's so unique in the way they want to train and how they do it. But the essential is, as far as AMI, I mean, they recognize everyone's different. They're not trying to make a cookie cutter, you know, this is how it has to be. They're very clear about the curriculum. That's what they dictate, and the guidelines for the curriculum. But then after that, they know that each trainer will do it slightly differently because we're all different people. But they do want to make sure you go out there with a very thorough understanding of the theory.
Yeah.
So
do you feel like there's a bit of a stigma in AMI in particular between about Montessori, long day care Montessori, and Montessori in the public sector, and that, you know, we need to find a way to make Montessori work where it's needed in those sectors?
I think there has always been stigma. As I said, when I came from London, I started a long daycare setting because I arrived from London where I'd had a nursery school, and then all of a sudden I thought, oh, they don't have those here. It's all, you know, I didn't know how to do it. And I thought, everyone said, oh, you have to get a childcare centre. So I was very lucky because my grandfather had left me some money, and my dad was a builder. And so him and my brothers and we literally built the centre. So I was writing to people in the States, I was writing to the UK and saying, who knows about long daycare setting? How do you do Montessori and long daycare? And I came across a lot of reaction from other Montessorians within Australia who were running, you know, programs that ran 5 mornings a week and 3 hours, and then did the extended day, which is what I knew in the UK as well. But I started doing a lot of research. I really questioned it. I contacted lots of AMI schools in the States. I still have all of the folders and things that people sent me, you know, all of their policies, the structure of how they ran it, the problems they'd had, the things that do work, the things that don't work. There was a whole group in the States of AMI trainers doing this at the time. And that was in the, well, my son was, he was 18 months, so he's now 33. So it's over 30 years ago that I was doing this. But there was a lot of stigma. So I don't know if it's still there in the same way, because I've met a lot of Montessori people who understand that you know, the way, if we look at the history of where Montessori started, this is about reaching children. So yes, let's just get out there and reach them. There's a lot of parents who choose, or for whatever reason, they go back to work. Mums who go back to work, they need childcare. So let's make sure it is good. That's important. So I personally have nothing against long daycare settings. But then it gets me to the, you know, is the person who's heading up that school, the person who's running it, do they understand the principles? Because one thing I don't like to see is when it's called Montessori and it really isn't. And for me, if I walk into a setting where it's not going to be perfect, I can guarantee there's always work. Everything's a work in progress. I'm not someone who expects it to be perfect. but you have to have the intention that you're trying to reach the goal of a class which is well prepared, adults who are well prepared. So somewhere along the line, for me, it would always be, and it's certainly how I ran my center, it's about educating the people who are going to be there to guide those children. So for me, the intention should always be that we're following the principles. So whenever I speak to my staff, it would always be about, not about what they've just done, but let's go back to this principle. So it was all about the principles of Montessori, even way back then, because, basically it's about the child. If I have a conversation with an educator, it's because it's about us meeting the needs of these children and also following Montessori principles. If I have Montessori on my sign, I'm working towards this. So for me, Mark, it's not that there's stigma, but we have to take accountability for, what does that word Montessori mean? Like, why are we using it? Like, it's okay to have a childcare center and have a good early childhood program, but then say that. Don't use the word Montessori. Like, if you're not doing Montessori, if I go into a classroom and see there is no freedom within limits, there is no order, there is no routine, there is, they're manhandling children, actually physically holding them, pulling them here, there, everywhere. For me, that is not Montessori. Like, fundamentally, it's not. So, and if I see it, it's not that I jump and think, oh, it's not Montessori, because it could be one adult who has not understood, but they certainly need a conversation. So I embrace childcare centers. I have no problem with people. I think it's great. We've got to get out there, and we need to be doing this, but we need to be doing it better. And we need to go back to Montessori's writing.
How many years have you been involved in Montessori now?
Gosh, I did my first course when I was 18, nearly 60 now. So a long time. Yeah. So possibly too long. I have a friend here who I studied my very first course with. She's from Greece and she's staying with me at the moment. And as I came in here, she said to me, are you going to tell them all you're going to retire? I said, no, I'll be doing this till the day I die. I think for me, Montessori is a way of life. It's made me the person I am today. There's not a day that I don't wake up and think, wow, I'm so blessed.
Have you solved the secret to the work-life balance in Montessori? The big question.
Well, I have to be honest here. No. I have to be really honest, and that's my next challenge, is working that out, because it's taken a toll on me physically. So yes, I'm learning that. I'm in a process of changing that about myself.
Julia, thank you so much for your time. It's been so interesting listening to you and talking with you. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And lovely to see some faces that I know.
Thank you.
It's lovely.
Thank you, everybody. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Right.